Yeah.
The new work from home rules, right? Make sure your cameras are always off or covered.
Yes.
Probably good with a laptop with the lid down.
Yeah. No, that's right. Okay, well, have we got, we haven't got Rowland or David yet.
I see Rowland's coming on now.
Is Rowland coming on now? Okay.
Yeah, he's on now.
Good afternoon.
Hi, afternoon, Rowland.
Hi, Rowland.
Hi.
And David's just lining up now.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, David, you're a bit faint.
Sorry, I'm a bit faint.
A bit faint.
Yeah, my connection is not great, so
Okay.
if you drop off, please excuse me.
Okay, well, let's start. We've got about 30 odd people online. So let's go to the slide then, Marianne. Click over. Okay, next one. Right. So first of all, to everyone on, welcome to the fourth in the webinars, topical webinars. We've got about 30 odd, 35 people growing, well, 39 now. It's growing as we talk. Previous webinars have been about 50 odd people each webinar. And so I expect this one will go the same way. And then, so as you know, we've had between 31 and 53 people viewing the webinars on YouTube afterwards. So I think we've got people that have found the webinars interesting. This is being the fourth one. We've got some local and international speakers. The international is, let's go to the next slide. Marianne, if you can click on the next one. Well, while we get that, so the local speaker panelist is David Pierre-Eugene from Discovery, and we've got Rowland Gurnell from Accelerate, and we've got the international. We've got Paul McChrystal, who's previous chair of SAFMA, phoning in, calling in from Dubai, sunny, warm Dubai. Welcome.
Thank you.
So what we're looking at for this webinar is an international view of returning to work. So what we want to present is we're down in South Africa. We've got our problems and our view of the world. And I think that Paul has got, in discussions with him, we've got a more global view, which I think will be very interesting to find out how South Africa fits in with the global return to work. And we've got the thoughts on that. I also have some questions. We said we would answer questions. I've got 3 questions, one of which I've got is on air conditioning, and we'll have a bit of a discussion on air conditioning and some views on that, international perspective, and a feedback from the CSIR, Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. So it's a scientific response. It's not just one of us making it up. And questions are welcomed. Inputs. So the webinars are a response to what's going on, what's our life as facilities managers and people trying to set up facilities, and also it's in response to the dynamic situation we live in. Certainly, some of the questions, all the responses we give are conditional, that they're valid at the time we give them, but certainly, as you'll find with the discussion, I think, on air conditioning, we'll find that life is moving, and what you hear one day may or may not be valid the next. So let's kick off with the international perspective, and what we're looking at is two aspects. One is the international perspective on returning to work, and the second part of the discussion is what does the world of work look like into 2021. So we've got back to work, and we've managed our way through to get people back, and we've sanitized and all that, and social distanced them. But what does the world of work look like going forward? And what is the impact on our office accommodation, our retail requirements, etc.? And that's a discussion that we'll have in the second part of the of today. So we've got we have got a question on that as well. So we've got two questions on returning to work, and one which mainly refer to air conditioning. So air conditioning is a big issue. And then the second half is, okay, guys, now we've got back to work. What are we looking at going forward? So Paul, I think if we can start off with you with in getting back to work, looking at the shorter term in an international perspective as to what's going on from, can we say, from out one side being the West, Europe, and when I say West, it's us looking upwards and not you looking down. So out on the left, the West, from Europe, the Middle East, and the Far East. What's going on, and how are you responding to that?
Okay, great. Well, from my time, good afternoon, everybody, to you all. And I just want to, if I can just state, so yes, I do work for an FM company currently, and I'm based on an international account which covers most of the Western world, so I'm very lucky in that respect. But anything I say today is very much my views. Okay, so I have attended your webinars over the last couple of weeks, and I think it's been great. It's really been great to be part of SAFMA again. But one of the things that has struck me is, and I've had a couple of these conversations with some of my friends back in South Africa, is that everything that I've seen that's been presented is exactly what's been done around the world. I got to be honest with you, I know a lot of people, for obvious reasons, in the past have said, yeah, but surely in the international world, you're doing so much better. No, I want to just state that right here and now. A lot of the stuff that I've seen being presented on the webinars is exactly what is being presented internationally. About the only thing that I would like to say as a suggestion, and yesterday with one of my other friends who sent me what they've done, actually has blown me out the water in the respect of, is just to go into detail. So many people, we're 3 weeks ahead of you at the present time, and by that I mean we've been out of lockdown for 3 weeks. But majority of people, the return to work percentages are extremely low, and we can go into that a little bit later. So what we're finding is anybody that has to go into work is obviously very, very nervous for themselves and for their families, but they're wanting a lot of information as to where do I go, how do I enter, where do I stand, and that sort of stuff. So if I could just say that from the one thing that I haven't necessarily seen on these webinars, but definitely starting to see from friends of mine, is when you put in a communications pack for the general of your staff going into return to work, put a lot of detail into it. Please put in a directional signage. If you're going to have multiple entrances for direction, you know, enter this sign. Don't be scared to use photographs, and make it as extensive a pack as possible for everyone to understand what it is you're trying to do, how you're trying to bring people into the building. Use the decals on the floor to indicate where people should stand when they're going into turnstiles, where people should stand when they're waiting for lifts. And then at the same time, there was one which I think I shared with John, which is decals of people being in lifts, which is obviously a small confined space, as opposed to people all standing the traditional way facing the door. At the present time, if you have potentially 4 people in a lift, they're all facing the wall with their backs to each other, so they're not breathing towards each other. At the other same time is to indicate if you are able to use, you want to say, emergency staircases, have one dedicated for up and one dedicated for down. But really, guys, there's very little being done internationally, and I'm talking about across Europe, across the Americas, and across Middle East, that is any different to what I'm seeing at the moment in South Africa with my existing colleagues and friends that I've actually been engaging with over this time period of us being just a couple of weeks ahead of yourselves.
So on that, what is the experience? We know that a lot of the guys out on the left for us being Europe are working from home. What's the experience of people working from Far East, India, in working from home, some of those challenges?
Sure. So, okay, so what we have seen, and we've been monitoring this quite closely, working from a financial sort of company, what we've been trying to do is they have, technology has stepped up. Technology was quite far behind to a lot of the companies I've worked for in the past. They have stepped up considerably. So we've had about 75,000 people working from home, depending on the countries, for as many as up to 10 weeks. And we've been monitoring the usage of buildings across a number of companies in the different markets. What's been extremely interesting to see is I regard Asia in a very similar light to South Africa. So we've seen majority of the buildings not drop down below 70% occupancy, even in the major lockdowns, as they were deemed to be critical workers to keep the economy going. Whereas in the Western world, a lot of my venues and sites have been running between 3 and 7% occupancy in total for 7 to 10 weeks. In that process, we started to ask some questions as to why such a big difference. And we found that in Asia, a lot of the time you have multiple layers of people living in an apartment. So you would have the grandparents, the parents, possibly two kids, as well as a house helper. And they would be living in a 3-bedroom apartment, and the 3-bedroom apartment would be around about 70 squares. So from a point of view, a very small space so majority of the workforce who have the ability to, I want to almost say, escape their home life, are going out into their working space, even if it is putting themselves at risk. Whereas in a lot of the Western Hemisphere buildings, with it being at 3 to 7%, it's because people have been able to work from home. But the next sort of layers being what happens to the younger generation who may be sharing houses, sharing apartments. They've been battling, and they may not have the equipment to use, as opposed to maybe an older generation who have space and maybe a dedicated study. So that's one of the biggest things that we see. And I relate that to South Africa, because obviously there's a lot of people in South Africa in the workforce who wouldn't be able to work from home for very similar reasons, may have a lot of other people living with them. And then obviously we'll come on to the other sort of aspects of things like electricity, the availability of internet, and so forth.
All right. You spoke, so that's some of the challenges, and I think that some of those challenges relate to what we've got in South Africa. And that we'll hold that question, because it's going to feed into the second part of the discussion as to what the world of work looks like going forward, and what some of those challenges are. You've spoken about lifts. So when we're looking at sanitizing, have you been using a lot of alcohol and bleach-based sanitizers?
Yeah, correct. A high alcohol content. And this is what's been interesting. So Dubai's government has put out some pretty stringent rules and regulations to abide by. Going back to work in Dubai, the restriction is 30% of your workforce is allowed to go back, only 30% or up to 30%. You have to do regular cleaning. So what we've obviously been working on is high touch points have to be cleaned every 2 hours. And that would be sort of lift buttons, lifts, entrance doors in and out of any pantries, sites, workforces. So those areas have to be wiped down every 2 hours. Obviously toilets and building. And what most of us have done, we've split ourselves into 2 shifts. So we sent out an initial sort of list to say who was prepared to come back to work, who was not prepared to come back to work. And then the people that were prepared to come back, we split them into 2 shifts. We called it one is green, one is blue. And then they would work, the shift on would work in the office for 2 weeks. The shift off would work from home for 2 weeks. And the weekend in between, we would fog the buildings. So we would actually fog through all the floors to make sure that there was never a contamination across the 2 shifts, just to try and ensure that we continue with trying to ensure that, you know, if there's somebody who gets sick on one shift, that was not ever transferred over to the other, just to make sure that you've got continuity within your support structures of the business.
Okay. So, David, how's that reflect with what's going on at Discovery?
Hi, John and everyone. Good afternoon. It's very similar. I mean, our cleaning is also intensified, especially in the call center areas, and that alcohol-based, more checks, as Paul has highlighted. The interesting thing that Paul has included that we've not done is the fogging. We only do fogging when we do have a case or there is a suspected case or escalation, and also a deep clean, which is done within a 10 meter to 30 meter radius once contact tracing has been done in terms of cases, or especially in the Western Cape, as you know, that's been the epicenter in South Africa. So that's quite a nice steer from Paul and team to maybe just do that more often and do more fogging. But we do, as we stated there, we do a lot of intensify cleaning, intensify clinical protocol of people coming in the building, ensuring that the regulations are adhered to, spatial distancing, all of those things, which is, as stated, aligned to international standards.
So the other, going back to Paul quickly, are you using hot fogs or cold fogs?
They're actually cold fogs.
Cold fogs, okay.
Yeah.
And then the question is, you've got all this alcohol floating around and bleach floating around. How are you storing it, and what are the protocols you're putting in place for storing, decanting, managing what is essentially a chemical which is more flammable, more dangerous than petrol?
I have to be honest with you, John, you got me there. From a point of view of, I know we've been working extremely closely with all the supply chain, and the reason behind that is because we're very worried of companies, you know, trying to keep themselves afloat. That, you know, we're worried that some companies may offload staff, which is not what we want to do. We're trying to protect that staff, because as soon as things start to increase, you can't just pull people off the street. You know, you're having to do a lot of training. You're having to make sure that people understand the difference between a higher level of cleaning. So we're working closely with them. We're obviously trying to use ventilated spaces. We're obviously trying to dilute down in the respect so that we don't have that, should we say, the smell of the alcohol coming through. There's a number of different chemical bases around that we're using, and I think as time goes on, after the initial panic of the world buying, I think a lot of companies are even stepping up the game. You know, there's a lot of the suppliers have been looking into extending their own offer as to what could be safer in order to be able to supply. So whereas the IT companies have stepped up with, you know, their offerings of things like Zoom, which I saw yesterday is now valued at more than the 7 biggest airlines in the world. And that's really, you know, that's not taken off in this sort of environment. So those companies that have benefited, and obviously those companies that haven't. So we're seeing a lot of, you want to say, traditional chemical companies are really working extremely quickly on what can they bring out that will be as effective, if not better, than the traditional, but with the lower risk of, you know, the things that you were highlighting, the potential of flammable and that sort of stuff. So we're in a pretty good space in that respect. But at the same time, you know, we are working to the traditional, make sure that the area that has been stored is kept safe, is locked, is restricted, has good ventilation to make sure that, you know, those chemicals that are in the area are not staying in there. Just something you said around air conditioning, and I'm not sure what your question is, but one of the things that we've been working on air conditioners, majority, especially within the Middle East, air conditioning is almost a human right due to the extreme heat that we get up to here. We've gone to try and go with maximum inlet of air, so a much reduced, should we say, circulated air, just to make sure that you're flushing the buildings, if you want to call it, as often as possible, just to try and increase the propensity to clean the air if there's ever sort of virus within the air. And I don't know what your question is going to be, but I don't know if that would help with what we're all doing. And that's obviously depending on the markets wherever you're in. You know, I think majority of the northern hemisphere is now going into summer, if not with what we're at the moment. But that's been used predominantly right across the Middle East, across Europe, and across Americas. That seems to be a standard, just to, you know, it may increase your utilities. However, there's a, you know, with so many people being in, with so many places being closed, and potentially, I'm careful when I say the word mothballing, because that means a lot, but sort of almost shut down to a minimum. You know, there is an increase on one side of the utilities, but because there's so much space not being used and turned off, there's a balance where we're finding majority of the utilities are being underspent presently. Obviously, I'm not sure how it works in South Africa, because I know that all my mates are saying that it's getting really quite cold down there, and at times I kind of wish for maybe a few degrees less than what we have at the moment, but I don't know about being cold.
Okay, let's come on to the air conditioning in a sec. I just want to go back to the storage of the alcohols from Rowland or David, whether you've got any inputs on that quickly, and then we'll go on to the air conditioning.
John, yeah, from our side, just for the alcohol-based, all ours get stored out in a area outside. All the decanting takes place outside, and what we take to our clients are in 500 ml to maybe 1 liter bottles. So we don't decant on the client site. We only decant at our offices and move it from there.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, I think there's a lot to do on that still.
Yeah.
I think similarly here, we're allowing the providers to decant in their premises and bring what is required on site.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. Look, just for as well, with a petroleum background, alcohol is extremely dangerous and carries a huge fire risk. So and it's like petrol, it drops down and sits in all the low spots. So your sumps, low spots is where the stuff gathers. Right, looking at air conditioning, we got a question a couple of webinars ago from a gentleman, and he asked a question, and it was, assuming the virus is a low risk from an aerosolization point of view, is it worth investigating the use of HEPA filters to purify the air in the room where we accommodate COVID-19 patients? The same question can be asked with regards to the use of UV. Is it not better to try and reduce the virus within a room rather than filtering the air through HEPA filters? And it went on then about ICU. So the question then, and then the question was, what is the actual time that virus is inside its transmission carrier fluid, actual temperature during its transmission, and concentration of the virus in carrying fluid? Okay, so that was a question posed to us as SAFMA, and dare I say that was way outside my pay grade. And so I went around and looked for some support, some help, and ended up with the CSIR and posed the question to them. And they've come back with their answer. And the answer was, these questions are largely unanswerable at the moment. So there you go. That was from the CSIR. But we can try to help by contextualizing what is known and what a prudent response would be, which we'll give you. And for all the people on this webinar, this response will be uploaded. And because it's from CSIR, it has also got 11 references to it. So it's a considered response. I don't think you can hold CSIR to it, but it's a response that we're using. So SARS-CoV-2 seems to have caused many to rethink the understanding of droplet and airborne transmission. These two transmission mechanisms form a continuum, but the following is generally accepted. Infectious particles are less than 5 nanometers in size can remain suspended and viable for many hours, and these contribute to the airborne spread. Droplet transmission involves larger particles which also can be spread through the air for some distance, but the range of transmission is generally considered to be less than 2 meters, whereafter the particles fall out of the breathing zone. Important to remember that within this 2-meter distance, these larger droplets are essentially airborne, and diluting ventilation systems have little effect on reducing the risk of droplet transmission. Droplet precautions, therefore, include the usual stuff, which is PPE, hand washing, distancing, and that's why the distancing works. Including respiratory protection, special exhaust or filtration regimes. Diseases seldom obey only one mode of transmission, but often have preferences, while occasionally exploiting circumstances. So studies have found that the real world of SARS-CoV-2 in air ducting and extraction fans have so far failed to prove the virus found was still viable. It has been suggested that high temperature and humidity would reduce the spread of the virus, with temperature ranging plus 50 degrees C. And that's beyond what anyone could endure. And here they're talking about, and then in ICU, but humidity ranges between 40 and 60 are achievable. The high humidity slows the nucleation of the viral droplet and increases its settling speed. So much of the work being done to understand the transmission is focused on community transmission. And what they basically, in going through this, they then move over to what is in ICU. But the general gist of what's being said is that in ICU, you should look at HEPA filters for reasons beyond just COVID. But there is no proof shown that air conditioning transmits the COVID virus. The example of the restaurant in China, which a lot of people know about, was actually it's been worked out that the air conditioner spread the virus through airflow, and it didn't take it and transmit it through the air conditioning. So the question is air conditioning a threat? And what we're seeing at the moment is no. Would cleaning filters make any difference? And the answer is probably not. In fact, if you go the other way and you take your filters and block them completely, you will stop all transmission of everything, including the air. So cleaning filters is about getting the filters to work at the design capability, reducing your electrical load and getting the right airflow. The question then is, what about using UV? And talking to the air conditioning engineers, they are looking at, some of the engineers are looking at this. But again, with UV, you need a contact period. So if the contact period is 1 second and the speed in your duct is 2 meters a second, that means you need a 2 meter contact for your UV to work. So what that contact period is, I can't tell you because I don't know, but certainly UV does work and could be considered. But generally what I'm seeing with this, and it will be posted and everyone can read it, and it does go into the ICU quite heavily, is that the transmission of the virus through the air conditioning has not been shown. What I think has been shown is that where your airflow comes out through your dispersers through the ceiling, and you are concentrating the flow, that should be changed. Because what you're doing is you're focusing an airflow onto someone, and that if that person is positive, you're then taking that and pushing the virus into the space. So I think while having fresh air is important, what is important is slowing down the rate of flow from the outlets of your air conditioners so that you're not causing focused airstreams, because that is a transmission mechanism for virus. Now, people know that you sit in a space and the air conditioner is blowing on you. That should be changed, because that is the mechanism by which the virus was spread in China. So thank you for that. I think that that sort of gives with the references, an answer on the air conditioning historically and what the threat is. And certainly we know there's a lot of nervousness. So from the FM's point of view, it's a case of managing that airflow coming out and reducing the speed while still keeping the airflow turning over. Right, the second part of the webinar is, okay, so now we've got back to work with where we are. The question is, what does the future of work look like? And before we put it to the panelists, I would refer everyone to go and Google Graham Codrington. Graham Codrington, as you know, is a futurist. And on the web, if you Google him, you'll find various talks. And what he's saying is that the future of work is a paradigm shift away from where we've been. So where we were gently easing to in the beginning of 2020, COVID-19 has caused us to step change. And if you want to know what the future of work looks like, he actually doesn't have the answer. What he does do is he says, listen, you need to take if you think that the future of work is a gentle progression from where we were, he's got bad news for you. It's not. It's a step change away. Now, the question is, what does that step change look like? And that he's not giving you because he probably doesn't know. And that is something we will have to work out. And what he is saying is, if you want to think about it, take yourself 5-10 years down the track and look backwards to where we are now. So you need to envisage what the world looks like in 5-10 years time, and that will be what the world of work will look like. To take the world of work from where we were in January and then do a gradual change forward, you're not going to get to the right answer, and the world will leave us behind. Right, on that happy, cheerful note, Paul, in the world of work looking forward, what do you see it looking like once we've got back and we're looking 2-3 years down the track? What do you think from your Dubai perspective the world of work looks like?
Okay, so I think what you were just saying, it's going to be very different. And I also think that anybody who thinks that they know the actual final answer is wrong, because there's so many things happening. Can I just revert back? There was a question from Andrew just saying, what about Legionella? One of the things that I just wanted to close off, we also put quite an extensive checklist together for engineering. So for exactly this, there's Legionella. As I said earlier, there's been a reduction, quite a sizable reduction in a lot of the utilities and spaces that haven't had people. And so some of the majority of my buildings, we had a few people in it. So we kept a lot of the infrastructure running, even if it was running very slowly. But there were countries like France and Germany, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, it's been in a complete lockdown where a lot of the stuff was shut down. So we put in quite an extensive, not only on cleaning the buildings, going to make sure, have a look at what are the PPMs that we may have missed to try and implement them before people come back into work. And one of them was Legionella. One of them was definitely with a person walking around using the required PPE to run water at the end of the water line. So it just, from your point of view, Andrew, it is definitely something that we've put together on the engineering lists to try and ensure that we picked up air handling units, make sure the air handling units are clean, make sure that Legionella has been, water has been run through all of the pipes. Is quite an extensive thing which we put together, and we try to do all of the what we call PPMs, life safety as well as regulatory, before we brought anybody else into the buildings. But back to your question, what we're going to see in the future. Okay, so it's quite interesting, and at the moment, my personal impression is there's those companies that are able to use technology to be able to have people working from home definitely are going to. I realize that not every company is going to do, but let's just take some of the financial institutions around the world. If you recently, Jess Daly from the CEO of Barclays was referring, he has a building on Canary Wharf with 7,000 people in it. He's saying, I'll never bring them all back into work. At the same time, Jess Daly, JP Morgan, and one of the other big financial institutions in New York have also stated, I think it's between 20,000, 200,000 people. It's a big number of people that they bring in. They're saying they will never bring them back into the office in Manhattan, which is really expensive environment. So if you have a look at a lot of the big companies that have been having, big buildings with lots and lots of people, and they're saying up to this point, for various reasons, to keep the buildings going, they diverted funds for any upgrades, any projects into technology. They've stepped up to technology. As I say, the account I work on currently, there's 75,000 people working from home and have been for in the region of 10, 12 weeks. So from a point of view of why bring those people back to work if they don't have to? Okay, so that's what's already been said, and I know there's a lot of companies at the moment looking at, so what is the right percentage of people to bring back? And I think this is going to be the interesting portion of the next 2 to 3 years. So I've seen a number of different documentations between bringing 30%, 50%, 70%, and I think that's obviously going to take some time. But as I said, in where I am now, we've been out of unlock for 3 weeks. I've got 2 big buildings here in Dubai. We haven't got over 11% of occupancy yet. Okay, so initially, I think people, if they can actually work from home, don't want to go back to work. I can say from my personal point of view, I don't think I'll ever go back into an office more than 1 day a week. What's going to take place at the moment is, so you have the people that can work from home, and you'll have the people who are sort of sharing accommodation, don't have space for a desk. And I ran a competition with my team recently, and you had to take a picture of where you're working from. And some of them, we did this on purpose to allow people to understand what some people are having to go through in order to maintain their work. And you have people, one, sitting on a kitchen stool, and because we have a client and our own company with a laptop and another 2 kitchen stools. Now, if you just consider that, that's not a sustainable way for anybody to work. So you're going to have a portion of people to go back to work, and I've seen various percentages of people. So potentially 50% of your workforce going back to an office. Now, whether that's 30%, 70%, only time will tell. You'll then have, on the example I'm using, there was 50% going back, and that's very much the people who physically can't work from home. 40% of the people going back for no more than 2 to 3 days a week, and 10% of people who will only go back into the office when there's a specific requirement to do so. So what does that mean for the space? Initially, right now, with social distancing and remembering what I said earlier, we're not allowed to go over 30% here in Dubai. And we're obviously looking at how that would affect other countries, New York, London, Frankfurt, Warsaw. There's going to be, you have to have space in order to do the social distancing, as I think was clearly shown by David on his presentation. But depending on when that starts to happen, you know, even at the moment, if I'm at 11%, and at the moment we're not even going to get up to 20% by the end of August, that means there's still a 10% gap. So there's an opportunity for a fair amount of space to be released from a portfolio when you're coming up to an end of a lease agreement, to the point at the moment in Dubai specifically, there's a glut already of space for people to hire, high-end space. So what is the impact? The impact is those people who are looking over the next year to build a new building have stopped. How are you going to be able to construct buildings if you can't actually get people into it, or you can get only a small percentage? It's already affecting the rentals, both residential as well as industrial rentals, because there's so many people, unfortunately, with some businesses having already gone into liquidation. There's already the space available. So those are the initial two things happening. Then when I say you've got people like Jez Staley saying, I'm never going to bring people back into the office, or 20% of the people, there's a number of spin-offs. The one side is what happens to that small coffee shop, pizza shop, lunch shop that has always been sort of supporting, say, 7,000 people in Canary Wharf, or many shops in New York, or anywhere else. It could be in Santon. The people aren't going to be there anymore. That's this one side. The second side was from a point of view of what is the duty of care for customers or companies to their staff. So if you're wanting your staff to work from home, what is the requirement from a company's point of view? Do you have to supply people with a chair, an ergonomic chair, a desk monitor, a desk arm monitor, keyboards, mouse? We've already seen a number of companies have allowed people to go and purchase initial, let's just say, mouse, keyboards, stuff like that, and the expenses, and that's globally. The next question has already swung over to, okay, well, let's use a 60% occupancy in our buildings and 40% at home. Number one, we can get rid of X amount of space. That puts X amount of money back on our balance sheet. We now need to invest a portion of that back to our staff to allow them to buy chairs and desks and equipment. So the people that don't have the ability to work from home would work currently in the existing office. The people who can, in some way, would be supported to ensure that the company has a duty of care for each of their staff members. What we've been doing, one of my team members, a few team members around Europe have actually been doing very much calls like this, Zoom calls with people working from home, to try and help people set themselves up ergonomically working from home, trying to make sure that they understand where their head should be towards a monitor, how their arms should be, how the desk, the height of their chairs. So, you know, from that point of view, and we've just seen the amount of people who have been really appreciative of, I want to say, kind of one-on-one attention from my team, and we're now extending it right across 24 different countries of the world. And I foresee this service in the next couple of weeks being extended to 61 countries of the world. So, you know, the things are happening, and that's why I said, you know, anybody who says they know exactly what it's going to be in the future, I don't think we're there yet, and I think it's going to change. I think there'll be a lot of mistakes made in the next 2 years, but I feel it's going to be extremely exciting when you take those people that can't work from home, those people who can work from home. How do you look after the people that work from home? How do you do to provide for them? And at the same time, what is the wider impact on towns, cities? I can see we've started a whole lot of online works with regards to Zumba classes and various other things which we do live from a company point of view, so the company pays for it. But it's about engaging people. There's, you know, many calls. And I suppose it's also changing the way people manage. The traditional manager who wanted to see his 200 people sitting in front of him. I think there are some people who are going through quite a change management process. But a lot of the stuff that we've seen, productivity levels have not dropped in delivery. What has dropped is obviously the number of businesses that are able to work, a number of businesses that are able to earn money, which is from a financial industry. So if you want to call it, the supply chain has slowed down in towards financial industry bodies. But it's an exciting period of time, and that's why I'm really chuffed to be able to give a bit of a contribution here from what I'm seeing literally across New York, London, Warsaw, down to Qatar and Saudi Arabia. So it's a mix and match, but it's a really exciting period of time.
So before we let you go, which you're not going to do just now, you've got the argument that comes up, but my business can't do that. We can't work from home. We're to this, that, and the next thing. You've got the example of the traders. You want to share that one?
Yeah, sure. So, and something I was just telling John the other day, guys. So I understand that a lot of people say, yeah, but this is what's happening in the international world. So not just to allow you to know that there's a specific, I know of one bank, there could potentially be others in Sandton right now who are allowing their traders to be working from home. Now, traditionally, trade floor, every keystroke, everything gets monitored, gets uploaded at night time, gets sent to the Reserve Bank for any queries, investigations that happen down the line. So those traders are already working from home. Okay, so that means technology has stepped in, regulators have allowed people to continue working, which is already a plus. So it is impactful. The other thing, and I know with various discussions, you may find right now that let's just say a small to medium-sized business has decided that, you know what, we're under strain. We're going to try and make some really quick movements, and I do think there are going to be a number of quick moves. But we have 20% of our staff who can't work from home for various reasons. I think you're going to see a lot of shared working space. Those sort of companies like WeWorks, there's a number of them that are popping up, and I believe there's a WeWork which popped up in Sandton in the recent times. And I think you're going to find that people are going to start to, that small percentage of people will go into a share space environment where they probably can pay a membership. And obviously it doesn't mean that they can have to go into Sandton. They, you know, with the proliferation of these shared some companies, people will start to work in one closer to their home. So what does that also mean? It means that you're able to get those people who can't work from home into an office environment with the backup. But now it means that those people who traditionally have been living in Hartbeespoort Dam and struggling to get into Sandton every morning and afternoon probably only have to come in once a week and probably only set up the meeting for 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, so they're not battling the traffic. So there's a lot of spin-offs for people in New York. They can live in Connecticut, they can live in New Jersey, so they can live in sort of better accommodation as opposed to a one-bedroom flat in Manhattan. You can now buy a 3 or 4-bedroom house 2 hours outside of New York. So there's going to be spin-offs around it, but I do think that there'll be a lot more working around with shared accommodation, shared sort of environment. But then the first thing that's going to come up is, do we know if they are cleaning their environment as often, up to the scratch, up to the level? So I think there's so many things that are going to start to take place. When I put it down to, we went from cellular offices, then we went to open plan sort of with screens, then we went to bench seating, and it was densification, so which we call flexible working. Okay, so now I think it's work from home, which is going to be the next few years. And it was one of the reasons I was one of the first to start working from home when we spread ourselves into shifts. So it was 2 or 3 weeks before we went into lockdown. And I did it on purpose because I think what's going to happen over the next year or two, a lot's going to have come out of what I call the biggest work from home experiment across the world. And I wanted to be in it. So I wasn't able to leave my apartment for 8 weeks. I suppose it's coming up to something similar to what you guys are experiencing. And I could feel how I was starting to come apart at the seams because we were constantly working. I have found that I've worked probably an extra 3 hours a day because I'm kind of following the sun, starting Singapore's 4 hours ahead of me, UK at the present time 3 hours behind me, and New York, thank goodness, with the current times, only 8 hours as opposed to the traditional 9 hours. So I'm working an extra 3 hours. But I would take that over because when my wife and I want to go out for a walk in the early evening, I'm home. I don't have to travel home. I don't have to travel into the office. It's just, to me, it works. And I think I'll be one of these people who will try and work from home for as long as I possibly can. But the area, we've already started designing a lot of the space, workplace space, to spaces where when people who are working from home are not going to go into the office to do emails. They're going to go in the office to collaborate with their teams, collaborate with other teams, have team meetings. So a lot of the traditional desk space is now going to be turned into coffee environments, coffee shops, different types of communal areas that you would want to be engaging with people, not going to sit in the corner and do your emails and respond to things like that.
Okay. David, did you have an input on that as to where you see it going? Thanks for that, Paul.
Yes, I do. I think I referred to just a couple of points. I know we've got probably 10 minutes left.
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes.
One is to refer to a workplace survey that was done about working from home from IFMA, or Workplace Evolutionaries. And the feedback was, and it was an international survey, I did share it with some of our directors. The working from home prior to the COVID was on average about 31%. Now it's close to 88%. So definitely there's been a big shift. It was, as you said, Paul, imposed social experiment. But I think going back, we'll probably see 70-30 people working from home. And we've seen it in our own organization. We're close to 90% of people working from home. And it will have a very wide impact on how we work. And one of the comments that I've made is, the roles are going to be reversed. We used to go have a day a week to work from home to have focus work. Now you're working harder at home. So now the office is going to become your escape, where you're going to go and socialize and collaborate, and you'll be going home to do your focus work. So I think the world is going to change, and I think as facilities managers, we're going to be in the forefront of this, and it's a great opportunity for us to show our mettle and to help organization to review the space that we use, how we use it, and support businesses, because the drive is to have a different type of work environment.
Rowland, you got some views?
Yeah, no, I agree with both of those. I think the only thing that we're seeing as a problem in South Africa, once everything goes back to normal, all industry goes back to normal, and load shedding starts, is how people then work from home. Because at the moment, all businesses, all offices, shopping centers have all got generators, got water if there's cuts. So once people start working from home, you don't have that generators. They don't have generators. They don't have water tanks. And I think those are the things that in South Africa especially, that is something we have to look at, is how you keep people working in load shedding. As you know, before lockdown, we were going 4 to 8 hours on load shedding in some areas. So that for us, that's the biggest concern. The other concern is that we are going to have less people working from home, from the office, and that's going to have a knock-on effect on industries like cleaning, like security. So there's going to be more of those people sitting without work as well, and those are things to consider.
Just maybe to add on to that, there's one more thing to consider is technology. Having the availability of technology from a positive point of view, Wi-Fi, all those things, and making that technology available. One of the things that we've done, for example, is 2 of our switchboard ladies are working from home. We were able to provide a technology for them to work, and they're both blind, by the way. So they're able to, we've sourced equipment, that they're able to work from home, which makes it easier for them, and they're able to connect back to our infrastructure and work from home, which long-term effects is great, good work balance. But yes, it does rely on technology, it does rely on infrastructure being available, and support not only from a technology and infrastructure, but also emotional support, collaborative, and the managers' roles are also going to change. The way we manage our teams, it's going to have to be a bit of a change management, and emotional support is going to be very key to regular meetings and all of that, to ensure that your team is working efficiently.
Well, totally agree with you, David.
I think that answers one of the questions we got, which was looking at where resources, financial resources will be put to upgrade infrastructure. And what we're hearing is money is going to go into change management and technology because infrastructure resources, other than electricity maybe, we will have a surplus. So the investment of all sizes of companies, be they one-man bands, SMMEs, up to large organizations, it's going to be about infrastructure and I guess being able to manage in South Africa the impact, as Rowland has picked up, of power outages. Another question that's come in, which is looking at the future, is, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to answer it here, but we'll table it. Moving forward regarding space planning, shared and open office space in the context of sharing the same air conditioning unit, be it centralized, mid-wall splits or cassettes, will we have to design single offices moving forward, or will HVAC industry invent a solution? Well, I think we worked on the air conditioning that actually it's at this stage, and it could well change, not seen as a transmitter of the virus, but certainly I think that has been demonstrated is that the airflow is a mechanism for transmitting virus. And when they talk outside, they say where you're working or walking in a light breeze or a strong breeze, then that droplet can be pushed further downwind. So I think that air conditioning will be looking at airflow rather than the ducting and centralization of the air conditioning. But thank you for those.
Can I just say, I think there's a lot of companies who are looking at opportunities. Everybody's looking at what they can do in their line. And if I read an article this morning, I can't remember if it was a LinkedIn, but where Google is working now with Vodacom and MTN to try and put a new line into South Africa to improve the internet, which they've already said is going to be a requirement in you want to call it the new way of working. So I think you're going to find a number of, you could find an aircon company looking to try and solve for that. But I think there's going to be a lot of other companies that are going to be looking to solve what they can, bring their difference to ensure the growth of their business, because I do think it's going to be a big disruption for the for business as we've ever known it. And I agree, South Africa has got some specific sort of scenarios with power, internet, people having space. So, but I think South Africa has always been resilient in so many ways. You know, Corbus, I know is on here, we used to always say a boer maak 'n plan. So yeah, it's fact. You know, I think that's the beauty of this, is that going to be so many companies are going to try and say, what can I do that's going to solve for this problem on a small scale, big scale, or whatever. But it's going to be exciting.
Okay. So in the last minute, thank you very much to the panelists. Thanks, Rowland. Thanks, David. Thank you very much, Paul, for flying all the way in from Dubai. Great to have you here. And thanks to all the participants. This will be up on on our web. Thank you for the questions. It makes for an interesting discussion. We're in dynamic times, and SAFMA will be working along with you to try and map out what the future looks like. So we put up the poll. What do you think the offices of the future will look like? There's our poll. No changes. Well, you can fill that one in. More cellular, less people working from office, more temporary workspaces, more high screens, open plan with perspex screens. So we'll look for the answers on the poll. But join us on the next webinar. We've got a whole range of speakers lined up with more interesting topics. And if you've got views and you've got questions, you let us know. And if we haven't got the answer, we will go like we did with the air conditioning one. We'll go and source the answer from whoever the specialists are. And that answer on the air conditioning will be up on our web. Thank you very much. Stay safe. And thanks very much to the panelists. We'll close this webinar now. Thanks very much, guys and ladies.
Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.